Hello and welcome to All in Motion. I'm your host, Jake. This is episode 21, part 2, The Life of a Combat Medic. Hope you all enjoyed part 1 yesterday. Got a lot of great feedback. I actually took the time myself to watch it, or excuse me, listen to it again. It's great. And next we have part 2, and then part 3 will be out later this afternoon. It both a little bit shorter, so both still very good and very impactful. So please listen, and also if you have time to provide some feedback. Excuse me. In this part, Doc discusses why it's so important that your quick reaction force, and for the civilians, quick reaction force is basically the soldiers, Marines, what have you, that are on standby if their fellow soldiers are out in sector and they get shot at, blown up, and they need reinforcements. So he goes over that and how your weaponry and how important it is you know about your terrain, and then also number one, well, they're all number one, but the enemy as well. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Doc Van Tuyl. I want to get a few of these stories that they're important to me, and I think it's really cool. And I want to say thank you for we'll touch on them briefly if that's cool with you.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
So there's one that the most important one, I believe, probably for you and being a medic, and that was, I just remember, as you were out at that time. You were out with First Squad, correct?
Right, right.
And I want to say it was. I just remember. I mean, bro, we're talking about 2008, 2022. So we're talking about what's that? 14 years ago.
Yeah, 14 now.
So
That's
I just
crazy.
remember, and I know you and I spoke about this, and I think I want to say thank you because this is your interview, but I want to say this is a very big moment for you, and thank you for letting me speak about it. But you got into a firefight, someone had gotten hurt, and we'll get into it. Um, but I'll just make the introduction. I just remember the fact that when we were caught up, we know that someone had been hurt. We knew
Right.
that you guys were taking fire. And I
Yep.
remember, I don't know, I know Second Squad eventually came, but I know it was us, and we just ran and jumped on the trucks. And I remember, as you and I spoke about it, I've never shared this, so I'm gonna try to do my best. It
Yeah,
is.
you're good.
I just remember just seeing like it was it was our third squad, and it was the sun was setting, and I just remember looking down, and it was that part to Gob when you go in the valley, like get through in that open area. And I just remember the barrage of fire in between, obviously we can see our own fire with the tracers, right? Back and forth.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I just remember like thinking to myself, like, how can I get there quicker? But you know how dangerous it is compared to Iraq when that terrain of those switchbacks of rolling around a mountain.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I
And
mean that was a big thing too. Being on those roads in Afghanistan was a totally different ball game than Iraq, and that was a danger element on itself, minus the IEDs and the enemy fire and all that.
and when I remember that, man, and I appreciate this, is the fact that when I just, and I never shared this. Well, I remember that particular thing. I felt two things, like that adrenaline. It's like no one in the world's ever felt unless you've been in it, And there's people that have been shot at, obviously in the States, and been, that's a similar, very similar. But me wanting to be there so much faster because of what you guys were experiencing, going through. You know what I mean? Because I was
Absolutely. When you're trying
what
to reply to or respond to someone in need, I mean it's like time almost stands still. you
yeah.
know, It might be 2 minutes, but to you, it feels like 200 minutes.
And I just felt like, I was angry because I see like my people, you know what I mean? And there's been other situations, and, that is what it is. that I've been involved with. But my experience was I wasn't, at that point I was already in Iraq twice. I've already experienced enough and then seen enough that, I wanted to just be there so much faster, and then to witness, a firefight, and the sun was setting like that. I'll never forget that moment. And then I know we got there and we were spot on, and then you take it from here, because that was one of the biggest moments for you. And thank you for
Yeah.
wanting to be open and honest.
I mean,
Someone got
even
Go ahead.
yeah, even to touch on what you just said, like, I mean, it's a like we said we spoke about it earlier, but what a unique perspective. It's both sides of the story. So, to paint the picture, you're the one responding to my squad in a firefight, and one of my squad's guys getting hit. But also, I mean, and I'll just back it up just a tiny bit, and to talk about the National Guard and the active duty side of it, is that, and it's almost a question for you. You guys, when you're in a National Guard unit, you're generally from the same area or within a certain mile radius, and you get in this unit together and you deploy together. But I can only imagine, I mean, some of you probably went to school together or had family, might have been a cousin, or, so you guys are from a concentrated area, in a certain state, in a certain city. And so for you responding, you and your squad responding to your guys in need, from your point of view, that could have been a school. Soldiers were trained what to do in the chaos. And that night, I still to this day believe was the most, I mean, if not the most, it was one of the most chaotic events and ordeals I had ever been through. And it started off a very simple mission for my squad, that we were going to go out to a certain checkpoint on that supply road, and we were going to check in. And you could correct me if I'm wrong because it's been years, but it was it Afghan National Army or Afghan National Police Station?
There's both out there, but the ones that stayed on the main road in between Kushba and Morales Fraser, they believe that was police. The police
Okay,
little, yeah. But then we did work with the NA a lot, the Afghan
right.
National Army. You know what I mean?
So I know that particular checkpoint, where this incident took place. I want to say it was, a very small army, Afghan National Army element, and they had it similar to us in our situation. They had a little small fire base. It was just a building basically, and it had a series of small buildings on the other side of the road in like a horseshoe like formation. So our job was to go there, go to the checkpoint, see if they needed anything, talk to them, get intel, and go back to the base. And that night turned into anything but that. And I couldn't even, it's one of those, I couldn't break it down by the minutes because everything is, so chaotic. But I do remember we got there, everything was quiet. We set up the gun trucks in certain positions to look over the fields that were on the other side of the buildings. We had our security, keep us safe. There's a handful of us that dismounted. And I very distinctly remember to this day, I went and sat down on the steps of the army building, and there were these two kids sitting next to me, young kids, couldn't have been any older than 10 years old. And I was just talking to them the best I could, and we were interacting, you know, as best we could for people that didn't speak similar languages. I remember there was these two kids, and again, I don't know how long we were at this checkpoint when all hell broke loose, and there was an RPG that came um, basically over the top of the building that I was sitting in front of, came over the top of the building and hit a tree across the street from where I was. And it just so happened that Reed was sitting on the steps of that building, uh, feet away from where this RPG hit. So, as a soldier, when something like that happens, your immediate reaction is to take cover, figure out where it's coming from, develop a plan, and take action. Okay? So the very basics of being a soldier is that right there. So from my point of view, when that incident happened, is there were kids next to me. They ran into the building. The other civilians, the Afghani army or police, or whoever they were, they ran into the building. I rolled my left on the stoop, and I crawled into the building because there was a little doorway, and I made it into the center courtyard of the building. And I was at this point in time I was alone. There was no one with me. I wasn't with anyone other than these two kids on the steps. And so for a brief moment, there's that initial shock of what's going on, where did it come from, and so I made it back to the door. Now I'm inside of this building in a courtyard, but I make it back to a window next to the door because they actually had the door barricaded. There was a piece of rebar across the door, and they had knocked over a pile of sandbags, blocking me from getting out of the door. So again, now I'm separated from my element. That RPG hit. Do we have casualties? Everything's going crazy. To make a long story short, through the window, I hear cries for medic. Doc, medic, doc. And, I find my way out of this building. I won't bore you with the details, but I find my way out of the building and I run across the street. And we have Reed and I'm sure there were more people, but the two that stand out to me in this incident was Peslis and Mech. And they were right there, and there was blood on Reed's uniform, and he was still conscious and speaking. So, and my initial assessment was it wasn't that severe. And at that time, which honestly, it's something I still kick myself in the butt to this day. But a mistake I had made due to the nature of that mission, I did not dismount with my aid bag. So my aid bag was still sitting in my seat in my truck, not with me. I had a small leg pouch that had, two tourniquets, a couple vials of morphine, the auto injectors and other muscular injectors. And that was it. I had very basic life-saving capabilities on me. It was, like I said, a small leg pouch, just a few things in it. And that's all I had at the time. When I responded to Reed, I do 100% remember sending Mech to the truck because he was in my squad and he knew what truck I was in. So it just made sense that I sent him to my truck to get my aid bag. And I went, while this is happening, we're still taking heavy fire.
And for the audience, understand the aid bag is basically
that's all my life-saving equipment that I can carry as a medic. It's about a 80 or so pound bag that I wear on my back that has tourniquets, IV fluids, any, bandages, suture kits. I mean, you name it, anything to treat the wounded on the battlefield is what I had to carry in this bag with me at all times. And like I said, I have lived with that decision I made, as unfortunate as it was, but it is something I like to be real about. That in that one scenario, I made the decision to leave my bag in the truck because the mission we were on, it wasn't presented to us as a dangerous mission. We didn't have intel that something was going to happen. We weren't really, and I mean, you know how it is. We weren't really on high alert. We were on high alert because we're in combat and there's bad guys all around and anything could happen at any time. But we weren't in high alert because you remember those missions that we would get intel that something would happen, and so you were just, like I said, more heightened.
Absolutely.
So for this particular mission, it wasn't really like, we're just going to hang out here for an hour and go back to the base, and just to be honest, it was just one of those bullshit missions. We're going to drive to the checkpoint, we're going to chit chat, and we're going to drive back as 2-3 hour mission tops. And maybe, like I said, I couldn't remember how long we were there, but it wasn't very long. And yeah, anyway, so Matt goes and gets the A bag, and I'm still there the building that we were in front of, thank goodness we were in front of a building, but it was one of those firefights where we were surrounded on 3 sides. So basically the road that you guys drove in on to respond to us and help us was about the only direction that we weren't taking fire.
And to your point, I remember I had obviously I was one of the gunners there, and I remember you're right, it wasn't a field because I remember we pulled up, and I remember I think I was either first or we had there was 3 of us, so obviously 3 trucks, right? And
Yeah.
we were,
Yep.
and I just I just remember
Yeah.
firing right when I was pulling up.
Which is exactly what we needed, because the amount of fire we were taking and the situation we were in, it didn't allow, obviously Reed was, man down. I'm now treating Reed. So that's another weapon not in the fight. Mech is another weapon not in the fight because he's helping me. And then Peslis ended up taking Reed's weapon and trying to fire, but it wasn't a weapon he was, super familiar with. So, he had some difficulty in figuring that out, which, whatever, not going off on a tangent, but he figured it out. So when we think when it was happening before you guys responded, I mean, literally Hollywood style, for the listener to really give them an idea. I mean, there were chunks, there were mud buildings and plaster, and there were chunks
Oh yeah.
of the building just like blowing up over my head and just flying everywhere. And I remember I kept having to cover, because one of the things they teach you as a medic is it's my job to shield my patient with no regards to myself. And one of those things that's pounded into our heads. So when things are happening like that, we're taking fire. My job is to lean in as close as I possibly can to Reed and shield him from incoming fire and shrapnel and all the debris from the building. And it's what I did. And thank goodness Mech was right there to help me and open the aid bag and have it laid next to me and Reed. And I couldn't even tell you his name, but my rifle was laying on the ground. And I ended up giving my M4 to someone that was near me in this firefight whose weapon had jammed and, don't really have time to figure it out. And I just remember in the midst of the initial treatment of Reed and seeing where the bleeding's coming from and cutting his pants open to find, shrapnel and the source of the blood really, and all that chaos. I just remember someone near me, the rifle jammed, and I just like basically tossed him mine. I didn't need it. It was of no use to me. It was laying on the ground. Because my sole purpose was to treat Reed. And I mean, again, a lot of the details are fuzzy. It was so long ago, and it was such a hectic event. But I do remember the support element. You and your squad showed up and suppressed the fire enough that we could.
To let me share with you and talk about that.
Yeah, and to be real with you, it's really unique to get your side of it too, coming down those switchbacks and seeing it, and you're about to get into it, and then meanwhile, a parallel timeline, I'm on the ground in the middle of it, waiting for you, you and your three trucks to show up and help us so that we can get Reed out of there and get him the medical attention he needs, because there's only so much medical assistance I can provide on the battlefield. And so that was definitely one of those situations that, when anything happened, one of, a medic's first reaction is to call in a medevac helicopter, because I can get that patient to the next level of care quicker than any truck. And we, spoke briefly about the terrain in Afghanistan is mountainous and treacherous, and it would take more time consuming for us to drive all the way back to the base, the helicopter to land at the base, and then evac them that way. But that in this particular situation, that's exactly what had to happen. And I'm treating Reed, and I'm split up from my guys, and I, to this day, don't even remember who I made it back to Morales Fraser with. I just know that we loaded Reed up in the back of an ASV. And for those that don't know, obviously, but for those that don't know, an ASV is not designed to treat or to even transport people. There's a driver, and then the truck commander, and then a gunner, and they have a whole turret. And they have two big weapons in that turret. And then there's one teeny tiny little seat in the very back part of the ASV. And so it's not an ideal vehicle to evac someone in. And Reed, as you know, is a big boy.
You mind? Are you allowed to talk? Do you mind? I mean, I'm sure he's okay with it, but I know.
Yeah.
I mean, can you speak about any of his injuries, like how serious they were?
I mean, I can speak from.
I know there's certain things you
point of
can't say.
view.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to know because I think it's awesome what you did, and honestly, man, you don't get enough credit. And I just want to say thank you for what you did.
And it was from my point of view, the medic on the ground. I mean, there was unfortunately a lot of blood, and blood means holes, and that's bad. So you know, my brain and my reaction is to stop the bleeding. And so I remember I put a tourniquet on his leg. He had a significant, because you got to imagine he was sitting on steps, so his thighs were exposed and his torso, but his torso was covered by his vest, and he had his helmet on. Thank goodness, because I don't know, and I'll speak real quick on it, but I don't know if you've seen the pictures of his helmet and the amount of shrapnel that his helmet took, and him having that thing on, obviously saved his life. But from my point of view, he took some pretty heavy shrapnel to his thigh, and there was one significant piece of shrapnel that got him in the arm, right on his close to his wrist, and there you have concern in both of those areas. The leg, you have the femoral artery, which is major artery, obviously, in the leg, and then in the wrist you have the radial artery, and both of those can cause significant bleeding, and any type of arterial bleed can cause, a death in as little as 90 seconds. And so the main focus is to stop the bleeding, and you don't have time to assess, if it's arterial or vascular, and you just immediately put the tourniquet on and stop the bleeding. So I very vividly remember throwing, I cut his pant leg open, both of them, and I remember the significant amount of bleeding in his leg, and I threw the tourniquet on, and I don't remember if I put a tourniquet on his arm. I think I may have. I hope I did. I don't know. Again, it's been years, but that amount of bleeding, I would assume I did. And then I do remember trying to start, in that situation, trying to start an IV is obviously chaotic. And one of the worst situations you can start an IV in. And so we're trained not to start an IV to give fluids, but we're trained to start an IV to give access, or, if you were to be picked up by a flight medic, that a flight medic could, distribute fluids and medicine in that way through the IV. And so we just start, it's called a saline
it's the
rod.
idea is you're prepping.
Mm-hmm.
You're prepping, so
I'm doing everything I can in that
to
immediate
save
situation to stop the bleeding.
basically to save his life prior to getting him, if potentially if he were to be medevaced out. But
Right.
that way it makes it easier for that flight medic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The flight medic or the next level of care, they already have the access started, and they can immediately administer, life-saving drugs and fluids and things of that nature. And so I remember, again, all the details are hazy, but I remember Reed being a big boy, and me, I'm a very little guy, probably one of the smallest medics that you'll come across in the active military. But I was good at what I did, and in that situation, I didn't have medevac couldn't land a helicopter because that field that we talked about on the other side of those buildings was just saturated with enemy combatants. Couldn't land a helicopter there, and then throughout the firefight, and not that I was privy to it, but I had heard that there was intel and chatter on the radio, and that there were more enemy fighters coming to join the enemy side and take us on. And so there was a decision that basically the medevac said that they wouldn't land anywhere near us, but they could, if we got Reed back to the base, they would meet us there and immediately take them.
From Morales Fraser.
Yeah. And I think if you remember, that's a good, what would you say, 10-minute drive from where we were at back to the base.
That's about, if we were driving to y'all that when what do you call that, dusk, when the sun goes down.
Yeah.
We were flying. I had to tell the driver, I said, dude, just be careful around these turns, man.
Right. And it wasn't an easy route either. Back
once you get on flat ground, once you get on flat ground, it's not that bad. We weren't really that position. We were lucky that it wasn't that high up, because once we get down the flat ground, the main road, and then we crossed over into Tagab, and actually the Tagab Valley, you understand? Then it's a lot easier to navigate. You understand, right?
Oh yeah.
Because you're on flat ground. But when you're to your point, when you're trying to evade and trying to get him to, medevac, getting him back up there. And at that point, because like I told you, we responded when it was dusk, like the sun was setting.
Right.
And
Yeah, by
so
this point that we had medevac,
it was dark.
we got him in the truck. It was dark. Yeah. And the truck I was in, it didn't. I couldn't see anything. I was in the back of this truck, and so my main focus, I'd administered morphine to Reed to ease his pain. And
does that help?
Yeah, as a
obviously,
medically trained, you got to be careful because there's, if
gotta,
you lose too much blood, the morphine slows the heart rate,
and you got to be careful.
There's a whole
right?
slew of things.
Yeah, you got to be careful, right? It's almost like it's almost like you got to be an anesthesiologist at the same time in a way, right?
Yeah. And again, in the middle, and you can just picture it. I mean, in the middle of a firefight, and I'm trying to make these decisions like, do I give the morphine? Do I do this? And again, like I said, a very basic main goal is slap that tourniquet on, stop the bleeding, and then you can figure out what kind of bleeding it is later when you have time. But when you're in the middle of a firefight and your guy's bleeding and he's hurt and there's just chaos all around you, you don't have time to really dig into it. The main thing is tourniquet, stop the bleeding, a bandage if there's other minor bleeding, get IV access to administer drugs later. And then I made the decision to give him morphine because the amount of shrapnel he had was pretty significant. I mean, there was obviously, I'll say this in the nicest way possible. There were a few big holes that were causing a lot of bleeding, and then a lot of smaller holes.
Well, fortunately, because fortunately though, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, he did nothing close to any serious arteries though, right?
Correct. There was one
close.
And then I do, if I remember right, speaking to him a couple years ago, he had some nerve damage. One of the pieces of shrapnel severed a nerve, I think maybe both in the leg and the arm. So he had some pretty significant recovery due to that. Severing a nerve is deadly, but not deadly, but it's recovery time, and you use loss of use of that area that the nerve controls. But just the main thing, like I keep saying, is stop the bleeding. We threw him in this truck that was not made to have people in it, and especially a casualty as big as Reed laying down with another guy. Thank goodness I'm small. But the whole ride back, I just remember spoke about in the very beginning, and that's where that compassion comes into, because as a soldier you can't panic, and as a medic you especially can't panic. Your patient is very much so aware of your demeanor and how you act, and if you're panicking, they're going to panic. And so it's one of those things that you might be scared that this guy is really really hurt bad, and you got to keep it cool. And so to throw a little humor into this dark story, I very vividly remember after I gave him the morphine and we put him in the ASV and we started making our way back to Morales Fraser, that he started offering me his motorcycle. That, he didn't think he would be able to ride his motorcycle when he got back home to Pennsylvania. And so me being the guy that was there while he was under the influence of morphine, I'll just say that, he was offering me his motorcycle. So that when I got back, he was like, you can have a motorcycle. And and it speaks volumes too. And I'll give a little shout out to Reed here in this, and that whole situation. Reed, as you know, I don't know how close you were to him over there. He was a jokester. He was a prankster. He was.
Oh yeah. Him and I used to, we used to go. Him and I used to go back and forth.
And to give a little story, I slept right next to him in the B hut. So our beds were right next to each other, and every single morning, this dude would click on his Surefire flashlight and shine it in my eyes to wake me up. And if you know how bright those Surefires are. So that was Reed, man. He was a jokester, he was a prankster, he was funny, and through this whole ordeal, he was probably one of my best patients I had in the military. He was pretty cool and collect, and even a little comical, offering me his motorcycle. Awesome. Throw a little more humor, and not to, he can tell this story all day, but when we made it back to Morales Fraser, there was a brief period of time that the medevac was already en route. So basically, the idea was we were going to get him out of the truck, get him into the aid station, and there was a major at that time that was visiting Kutzbach. He was actually a mental health doctor, and he was visiting Morales Fraser at that time, just to because we had been through a lot in those short months. And so I made it back to Morales Fraser with Reed and whoever else I couldn't tell you. And one of the areas of concern that the shrapnel had gotten was the private region.
His groin.
And
I think they call that the
yep,
groin, right? Okay.
yeah, his groin.
Wow, thanks again, Doc. I appreciate it, and just want to say thank you thank you to the audience, and thank you to myself, and especially you and I, man. I mean, I wanted to appreciate you letting me. Both got both got a little bit vulnerable, but both very honest, and just want to thank you for going there. I know some of those situations can be difficult to speak about, so thank you again. For the audience, please. We have part 3 coming out this afternoon, and that'll be it for the episode 2021. So please tune in on the major platforms: Google, Amazon, Spotify, Apple, and we'll see you soon. From All Motion, this is Jake. Take care and be safe.